Welcome back to J.P.s World of Wrestling. I am your man J.P. So, today, like I said last time, today I'm going to profile another original San Francisco toy maker WCW figure. And then after that, I'm going into my next top 5 list. Yep. So, original San Francisco toy makers. Now, this guy is a guy, when I talked about them the last time, I kind of saved him for kind of later because I forgot that I had him. So I did all my figures, and then sometime later I found him, and I'm like, oh, forgot about this guy. So then I went back and kind of talked. So I'm not going to go into real deep career retrospective on him, but I'm going to show him to you. It's Big Bubba. That's right. In WCW, he was known as Big Bubba. Also, later on, he was known as the Guardian Angel, and probably a couple of other gimmicks, but he also just wrestled as Ray Traylor. But in WWF, he was known as the Big Boss Man. And as all of you know, I think he's probably one of the most underrated, underutilized wrestlers ever, because he was really great. And I liked him a lot. But as Big Bubba, he was also kind of underrated. I thought I didn't really like the gimmick as much as the Big Boss Man. But what's funny is after his run in WWF as the Big Boss Man, he came back to WCW and they tried to make him the boss in just a dark blue cop shirt. But then WWE gave him a cease and desist order, say, come on, that's just the Big Boss Man. You just dropped the big part and the man part, but that's clearly a Big Boss Man ripoff. So WCW said, okay, fine, you win. So they just made him Big Bubba again. Eventually, he joined the NWO, but then he got kicked out of the NWO. And then he kind of made it his mission to get back at the NWO by beating off him. And he kind of teamed up with a couple of other WCW guys to try to beat the NWO. But initially, he left WCW, and then he went back to the WWF in the late 90s as the heel Big Boss Man. And he was in like riot gear and all black, and he was kind of one of Vince McMahon's henchmen in the Million Dollar Corporation. Well, not the $1 Million Corporation, but just the corporation. That's a different thing. But speaking of that, it's time for my top 5. So, this is going to be my top 5 factions. Now, for those of you who don't know what a faction is, although I'm pretty sure all of you know what a faction is, but it's more than 2 guys. And these are some of the top 5 that I always kind of liked, always got a kick out of, I always thought were really great. So starting with number 5, the $1 Million Corporation. That's right, started by the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. After he retired from in-ring wrestling, they brought him back as kind of a manager, and he put together this stable of wrestlers, which included guys like King Kong Bundy, Tatanka, IRS, Kama, Nikolai Volkov, the 1-2-3 Kid, and Psycho Sid. That's quite a stable of wrestlers. Honestly, that's quite a stable of guys. Now, all of those guys collectively were never like in the $1 Million Corporation together. I mean, a couple of the members left, and then they brought in new members. But nevertheless, it was kind of a cool kind of group that they did. The $1 Million Man, he was kind of like the new like Bobby Heenan, where he just had this staple of heel wrestlers, and then he would cheat in order to get them to win. And like when Sid was there, he feuded with guys like Diesel, and so I just thought it was great. I got a kick out of it, and it was quite a stable of wrestlers. And I still remember when Tatanka joined the $1 Million Corporation. Before that, Tatanka was kind of accusing Lex Luger of selling out and joining the $1 Million Corporation. But then at a SummerSlam, I think it was SummerSlam 94, they wrestled in the match, and then we find out, no, it was Tatanka that sold out, that took the money. He went for the old scratcheroo and joined the $1 Million Corporation, and then feuded with Lex Luger. So that was pretty cool. And so number 4 was a group that was in Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, TNA. And it was the Main Event Mafia. Now, Main Event Mafia, I actually kind of like the Main Event Mafia. It was guys like Kevin Nash, Sting, Kurt Angle, Scott Steiner, and I think Booker T, which I don't really care for Booker T, but those other guys were really cool. It was the Main Event Mafia. You know, they would come out wearing suits, and they kind of acted like they were kind of running things behind the scenes, and everybody was kind of afraid of them and everything. And so I thought it was pretty cool. You know, I was kind of getting into TNA for a while. You know, I thought TNA was pretty cool. The only thing I didn't really like is the 6-sided ring. I didn't really care for that, but they had some pretty good talent there, and I thought it was cool. So, Main Event Mafia comes in at number 4. Now, number 3 was a group that I just always thought was just kind of funny, and I got a kick out of them. But they started in ECW, and it's the Blue World Order. That's right, the BWO, with Stevie Richards, Blue Nova, and the Blue Meanie. They were kind of trying to mock NWO. So, like, the Blue Meanie was supposed to be kind of like the Scott Hall character. Stevie Richards was supposed to be like the Kevin Nash character. And of course, Nova was supposed to be Hollywood Hogan. And he would like put blue paint that was supposed to be kind of like his beard. And the Blue Meanie, I always just got a kick out of him. You know, he would kind of like do this, and he would do like, when they made him a single wrestler, he kind of did these dance moves in the ring. And I always just thought the Blue Meanie was cool. He was one of my favorite characters to use on WrestleMania 2064 game. And I always just liked the Blue Meanie. And as a group, the Blue World Order, they always just were kind of cool. They were ECW's version of the NWO, but for whatever reason, they're the Blue World. For whatever reason, it's just random that they just use the color blue. I don't know. I just thought they were cool. So, BWO, Blue World Order, as number 3. Now, number 2 and number 1 are kind of interchangeable, because I thought they were both equally as impactful in the business, but especially for the WCW side of things. But number 2 is the Four Horsemen. Yes, that's right. So the original Four Horsemen was Ric Flair, Ole and Tully Blanchard, or Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson, and Tully Blanchard. That was the original Four Horsemen. And originally they were with James J. Dillon as kind of their manager. And so the Four Horsemen, they all had titles, so they were all sort of like the 4 top heels in the NWA, and they were all like the 4 elite wrestlers in the NWA. And the NWA, they were more about like the in-ring, like technical skills than actual like gimmicks and personalities. They had it come across more like a sport. So the Four Horsemen were like the 4 guys that had the titles, and they were all heels. Now eventually, like, Ole Anderson left the group, and then they brought in Barry Windham, and he joined the group, and then like Tully Blanchard left the group, and I think they tried to bring in Paul Roma. He didn't really work out, so for a while, you know, Sting was part of the Four Horsemen, but they immediately kind of kicked him out, and you know, they brought in different guys until eventually, I think the final Four Horsemen was Ric Flair, Steve Mongo McMichael, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko. That was the final like version of the Four Horsemen. But Ric Flair was always the constant. He was always like the one constant guy that was in. And they tried to bring in Kurt Hennig. There's this whole angle where Arn Anderson, because he couldn't wrestle anymore, tried to give Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, his spot. And so Kurt Hennig like rejected him and joined the NWO instead. And I remember the segment when the NWO came out, they kind of mocked the Four Horsemen and kind of made fun of that whole thing where, Kevin Nash was kind of dressed like Arn Anderson, and Six was kind of dressed as Ric Flair, and Buff Bagwell was dressed as Kurt Hennig, and he kept like tossing his towel, but yeah, Four Horsemen, they were a faction before factions were cool, which is why they come in at number 2. The number 1 is no surprise, it's the NWO. NWO. When the NWO first started, boy, did they have an impact on the business. Some of the stuff that WCW was doing in the late 90s is still kind of being done these days. And so that's the kind of impact that the NWO had. And people are still talking about it. People are still talking about, okay, who would be in the modern NWO? People post stuff on Facebook all the time. Okay, who would be like in the modern NWO? But anyway, the NWO originally, of course, was Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and eventually found out that Hollywood Hogan was kind of the third guy, Hulk Hogan, and he kind of turned heel and kind of joined this group. But eventually, one by one, people started joining the NWO one by one until there weren't really very many actual just WCW guys left. So there wasn't really a whole lot of guys left to fight against the NWO. But eventually the NWO started falling apart, and eventually it split into 2 factions, NWO Wolfpack, NWO Black and White. A few guys that were kind of loyal to Hollywood Hogan, and then Kevin Nash's group. It was Kevin Nash, Macho Man, Lex Luger, and Conan, and Sting. And then Hollywood, Hollywood had the Giant, and then he had guys like Buff Bagwell and Scott Norton, and, didn't really have a lot there. But nevertheless, eventually the NWO reformed to form one group again. But then they kind of went away, and then WCW tried to bring them back with Black and Silver, with both Jeff Jarrett, Bret Hart, and Kevin Nash, but that didn't really work. That was kind of when WCW was kind of on its way out. Well, WCW was kind of almost done at that point, so that version of the NWO didn't really work very well. And then, Vince McMahon tried to bring back the NWO, and it might have worked, but they couldn't really get Scott Hall to stick around. Scott Hall, God rest his soul, he had a lot of problems. But if he hadn't had a lot of those problems, I think the NWO could have worked in WWE. But they would have had to have done it the same way that WCW did it, where these guys have to come across as dominant, and they have to slowly wipe out the entire talent pool. But that wasn't going to happen in WWE, because WWE had guys like The Rock and Stone Cold, and WWF wasn't going to let those guys, The Rock and Stone Cold, they weren't going to let Rock or Stone Cold look like fools. They'd rather make WCW guys look like fools, which is what they did. After WCW got bought out by WWF, all the WCW guys lost to WWF guys. And I know guys in the WWF would say, no, that's not how it was. That's not what it was supposed to be. Nah, but to us fans, that's how it came across. Kind of WWF's way of saying, haha, we won the war. And that may not be the mentality, but that's kind of how it came across to me anyway. Anyway, NWO, number 1 faction of all time, in my opinion. So that's going to do it for this video. Stay tuned, because there's a lot more to come. I'm going to keep doing these top 5s, and I'm going to keep combining them with the original San Francisco toy maker figures. So I hope that you're enjoying it. Seems like you all are. And that's going to do it for this video. So if you're new here, go ahead and like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.